Welcome to the Pulse podcast by the Power Broker Media Group. I am your host, Adrienne Reddick. We hear the term affordable housing, but what does it really mean? What are the factors driving the affordable housing shortage, and what can we do to fix it? Joining me today is St. Petersburg native Ashon Nesbitt, CEO of the Florida Housing Coalition, a statewide advocacy and training leader in the affordable housing space, and host of the largest annual affordable housing conference in Florida, along with Amy Foster, a former two-term St. Petersburg City Councilmember who is now Administrator of Housing and Neighborhood Services for the City of St. Petersburg. Ashon wanted to shout out his fellow Lakewood High School alumni in St. Petersburg, which we will allow him as a point of privilege. Hi, Ashon. Welcome to the Pulse by the Power Broker Media Group. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. So I want to just jump right into it. We'd like to take advantage of your statewide and local lens. So can you share some of your background with the audience, how long you've been in the housing sector, and what the Florida Housing Coalition does?
Well, first, I always have to start out to say I'm a St. Petersburg native, born and raised.
Hey.
High school graduate. So it's great to be with you this afternoon. I've been in the housing industry my entire professional career, so spanning out 20 years now. And I've been with the Florida Housing Coalition for 8 years. For those that are unfamiliar with the Florida Housing Coalition, we are a statewide organization, been around for 43 years now. And, our big mission is to see to it that everyone in Florida can have access to housing that's affordable and a suitable living environment. We carry that out primarily through training and technical assistance, but definitely working with policymakers to be that source of information so that they can make informed decisions that really impact the need for housing affordability, both at the state and the local level.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate, because we know that housing is a big thing for folks. It's legacy building, wealth building. And so we are hoping that everyone can have a chance to do that. So let's start by having you explain in everyday terms some of the reasons for the affordable housing shortage, big picture, and some of the biggest specific factors impacting current market conditions.
Yeah, so as you know, housing is a very can be a complex topic to discuss. But if we were to put it in simple terms, for a long time, we just haven't been producing enough housing and enough of the right type of housing to meet the need. And it's really come to the forefront here in recent years. But this is something that goes back in decades. And if you look at all of the systems that contribute to housing production, it really has led to the point that we're at today. So if just simple terms, if there are 5 new households produced every year, and we're only producing 2 new housing units, over time, we just haven't kept pace with that household formation and housing production hasn't kept up with that. So here we are today, with a very complex situation. There are a lot of things that contribute from, economics, the job market. We had coming out of the pandemic, which really brought everything to a halt. And folks had to completely change, how they do things, how they operate. So, there's just a whole host of things. And, here recently, there's been a lot of focus on, how do we, start to get that production train going again. And of course, this kind of has started with looking at the regulatory environment. How do we, control or, not control where housing gets produced and gets built and what actually gets built. And so that's where the conversation has started, and it's been a lot of progress there. And of course, now that the next things after that is, all the other parts and pieces, the financing, the actual, types of production. How can we produce things faster, quicker, and produce actually what people need. And so it's a multifaceted conversation, and sometimes it's really hard to talk about it in simple terms. But eventually, if everything comes together, some of these conversations and actual actions, we can start to produce housing that's, quicker, faster, and actually meets the need and keeps up with demand.
Yeah, because I know that demand is high. I have friends who have, grown children who I definitely would want to be able to get into a home. And so hopefully we can get and meet that demand. So I understand that you've worked across a lot of different innovations in policy and production techniques and partnerships, et cetera. So which housing solutions would you say have the greatest capacity to increase affordable rental supply at scale? So for example, accessory dwelling units, the ACUs, tiny homes, modular, 3D printing homes, along those lines.
Yeah, so looking at the rental housing space particularly, I know that folks have probably heard of something called the Live Local Act, and what exactly is that? And so that's been a really has good potential to produce a lot more rental housing. So in 2023, the state legislature passed the Live Local Act. And so, that's over the last couple of years, it's been in place and it's been improved, but it has a lot of pieces to it. But the main thing with that was we call it a tool for local governments, really, that allows for folks to produce housing in commercial and industrial zones, regardless of what the underlying land use and zoning regulations require or allow, and allows them to produce it at the highest density. And what that means is, the most amount of units that you can produce on a particular property. It still has to meet a lot of the local requirements in terms of, landscaping and, all of the things that, we've talked about, or you all talk about at the local level, and that's incorporated into your comprehensive plans. And what we have seen over the last couple of years since that's been in place is a lot of proposals for new developments that have come out of that across the state just in the last couple of years. Since that's been in place, we've seen over 45,000 units proposed. And so, that type of innovation, if you will, in terms of, how we approach land use and zoning and kind of expediting that process of getting proposals and things to the approval finish line, I think can really, has the potential to produce a lot more rental housing. And that's just general rental housing. And also it has the affordability component as well. So at least 40% of those units have to be affordable to low to moderate income households. And so, I think this is a statewide innovation that has potential to have great production in our local communities. And what I'm excited about is how that's opened up the local conversations about how we can even do better than what the state has offered. And, St. Petersburg has always been, kind of a leader in the policy space,
Mm-hmm.
and continues to be so. And, looking forward to see what happens in St. Petersburg and how, St. Pete can be a example to other communities around the state.
So, Ashon, it's interesting that you mentioned St. Pete being innovative, especially around policy and the things that they're doing concerning affordable housing. And we hear a lot of complaints about what St. Pete is not doing. Can you give us some examples of where you see us being in the forefront around this particular topic?
Yeah, I can offer a few examples. Even going back to before the Live Local Act was passed, there were, some other tools that came through state legislation, which gave similar flexibility to local governments in terms of offering the ability to develop affordable housing in multiple zones. And so St. Petersburg was the first local government to really jump on that. Back in 2020, the state legislature gave local governments the ability to approve affordable housing developments in commercial and industrial, and at the time, residential zones, that exceeded allowances within land use and zoning. And St. Petersburg was the first local government to jump on that opportunity and to create local ordinances that gave some framework around how that could happen. And one of the developments that came out of that, or starting to come out of that, close to Gibbs High School at the former lumber yard that's being developed. So that's just an example of how St. Petersburg has been at the forefront. Also, here recently, there's been a lot of talk about accessory dwelling units as a way to increase housing supply, and St. Petersburg has been a leader in that. Over the last few years, has really opened up the number of properties that have the ability to develop accessory dwelling units. Just about every residential property in the city now, under current regulation, can have a ADU. And I know the city's also been working on some financial assistance, working with, having some, a streamlined approval process for that. Some, help with design. And so, those are the types of things that really, once they really start to go, will start to facilitate more development. And these are the types of things that other communities are looking at as examples to follow. And so St. Petersburg is often the first to jump on these things that are being offered, from the state level, and in some cases kind of informing what should be done at the state level, and being at the forefront. And I do know, these things take time to really to produce. And the need is right now. It is very urgent. And so, I do understand that, but just still want to point out that, there's a lot of good things that's happening at the local level, particularly in St. Petersburg.
Okay. And then just to tag on to that, since we have viewers all across the Bay, is there anything in the Tampa area that's innovative or going on?
Yeah, I do know that Tampa, the city of Tampa, similarly, is in the updating their comprehensive plan and their land development regulations in a similar way, to expand allowances for accessory dwelling units. And so, that's just one of the things I know that's at the top of their list currently. And so, and I know they've done quite a bit, in terms of facilitating higher density development. The partnership with the city, some of the huge redevelopments of, housing authority properties. And so, that are producing, coming back with more units that were there before. And so, we're seeing those types of activities happen across the Bay as well.
Okay. One thing I have noticed is that a lot of people are looking over in the Ruskin area, Riverview, because the housing prices seem to be a little bit less than living in St. Pete. Are we we'll continue to see more production over in those areas as well?
I do think we'll continue to see, more production, that, those options being increasingly looked at, in terms of another affordable option. And, that kind of speaks to, some of the challenges, I think, that still exists in the affordable space, particularly in St. Petersburg, and as the city continues to develop and redevelop. How do you maintain that affordability long term? And, realizing that the land use and some of those things are good things, but, not often enough, in terms of, looking at, maintaining affordability. So it does create an environment for producing more units. And I do think, alongside of that, looking at ways to further incentivize, within those programs and initiatives, production of housing that is actually affordable. And so, that's work that continues to be done. And I know those conversations are taking place. But, there's still going to be those options in terms of, folks that are looking for a certain lifestyle, and
Yes.
where they can achieve that by, choosing to move to a suburban location.
Okay. So, knowing that most Black housing developers in Tampa Bay operate in the single family and small to medium multifamily space, what are some of the ways in this segment of the market is building and scaling their operations?
That is a good question. I think it first starts with, just, where those opportunities are in terms of land. That's kind of the first thing. And so, in a city like St. Petersburg, land is at a premium. And so, again, that goes back to some of the regulatory things in terms of, creating more opportunities for land to be developed. And, that might be looking at, lot sizes, and what can be built on, even smaller lot sizes, or, how many more units can be built on a particular lot. So those are the types of things that will begin to open up those opportunities, as well as, city-owned property. The city has done pretty good, with the lot disposition program, and, really recruiting developers, both for-profit and nonprofit, to participate in that. And so, I think that's the first thing, is kind of creating those opportunities for development to happen. Secondarily, creating, access to capital is another issue that I know that folks come up against. And so, there are, things that the city can do, but there's also kind of where the private sector, I think, needs to come into play, is, creating, those opportunities for folks to access capital to develop those properties. And so, whether that's banks or community development finance institutions that are, creating those opportunities for folks to access capital, I think that's, a continuous discussion that needs to happen. There are things there. And then just kind of just the technical expertise to navigate all of these processes, which is, something that, we do as an organization. But we know there are, even some of the folks like, Black Business Investment Fund, and some of the other CDFIs that do provide that type of support for small and emerging developers to get into the space. And, those types of efforts just need to continue to be supported. And, more, we can do more, of course, to let folks know that those resources are available to them, if they wanted to pursue, this type of business.
So, speaking of that, is there anything in particular you want to note for those types of programs to let the community know what those are?
Yeah, I definitely speak to, the Florida Housing Coalition. We work in partnership with the state. We have what's called a pre-development loan program. It's really for nonprofits. So, for those, smaller nonprofits that are looking to get into the space, that comes with, financing and assistance through us. I also, know that Black Business Investment Fund, for example, works with, for-profit developers. And, they have both capital and technical assistance that they offer through their programs. And so there are a number of resources available. And, folks can definitely reach out to us, if they want to tap into any of those. Black Business Investment Fund is an important partner of ours. And so, between us and some of the other CDFIs, we try to cover the whole space, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit. There's room at the table, and, we're here to help.
And how would people contact you?
They can contact me directly. I can give you my phone number. It's 813-476-4170. That's my direct number. And also my email address is my last name, Nesbitt at flhousing.org. And of course, all of this is freely on our website, both my phone number and my email address, flhousing.org. You can find information about all the programs we offer to help developers, also to, help communities that just want to learn about policy. Most of our stuff is free. So it's freely open to anyone who wants to learn and find out.
Okay. This has been a very informative discussion today. I want to thank you, Ashon, for coming on and talking to us about affordable housing. I think there are definitely some nuggets in here for the community that we can help folks out and get them more information and learning around this topic. So I want to thank you for joining me today and giving the information to our viewers and the audience. Did you have any last parting words before we leave?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, there's a lot of activity in the space, and, it's great that the conversation is happening, at all levels of government, also, throughout, the business community, grassroots organizations that are really talking, and just want to encourage that conversation to continue. And, particularly for those that are experiencing, housing, cost burden or hardships, it's important to participate in those conversations as much as possible. I like to say, those that are closest, to the problem are also closest to the solution. And so, we really need everybody, at the table, talking about this, so that, those solutions that are really going to impact folks will really rise to the top. And, we're here as a resource. We want folks to use us. We are fortunate to be able to have those conversations with policymakers. So, please do reach out to us if you have just a question about anything, whether it's technical related or just, I've got an idea. What do you think about this? We're always open to hearing from that. And I just want to thank you all for this opportunity, and thank the City of St. Petersburg for, just being a good partner, and a leader in the state, and keep doing what you all are doing in the community. It really is inspiring to us, that work in this field.
Okay. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi, Amy. Welcome to The Pulse by the Power Broker Media Group. First, I'd like for you to introduce yourself to our viewers and let them know a little bit about you.
Great, thank you. I'm Amy Foster. I'm the Housing and Neighborhood Services Administrator for the City of St. Pete, which it's kind of funny. I like to say that my portfolio has a lot of hodgepodge things together, but I like to call it all things quality of life. So I have things like housing, neighborhood relations. I also have sanitation, which is an $80 million business for the City of St. Pete, as well as codes compliance assistance, social services, and all of our special impact investment areas, which includes things like the American Rescue Plan Act and our brand new $160 million community development grant that is on disaster recovery.
Oh, wow. That's huge. So let's get into affordable housing. That's what we're talking about today. So very quickly, how do we define affordable housing? And does this definition actually match people's real financial situations here in St. Pete?
Yeah, so I think, there's a lot of conversation, particularly with our elected officials, about how affordable housing is defined. And for us, it's defined statutorily. So we don't get to make up that definition. It's defined by the state in the state statutes. And so that is 80% AMI and below. But what I would push back on that kind of conversation that we have in our community a lot, Adrienne, we actually do produce the majority of our units, 3-1, actually, for 80% AMI and below. But if you think about it, you'll hear people in the community say things like, well, 120% AMI is more than $100,000 for a family of four. But you tell me a family of four that's paying $1,200 or more a month in childcare for each child.
Right.
And then, a unit here in our city, even for a 1 or 2 bedroom, is $2,000 a month. And so even at that, $100,000, $120,000 a year for a family of four, they still can't make ends meet. And so we do focus on that 80% and under AMI. But I do believe when you break down, the numbers that anybody puts out, whether it's United Way for ALICE families, which stands for asset limited, income constrained, and employed, it's still really hard for families to make ends meet when you start putting the budget together.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I have friends who have young people who want to be able to afford housing, and they just at this time are unable to do that. But I want to go back to one thing that you said, Amy, AMI. For those of our viewers who are not familiar with that term, can you explain what that means?
Thank you. Sorry. Government likes to use a lot of acronyms. So AMI stands for Area Median Income, and that is set each year by the federal government. And so, we look at whether a family is over the median income or under the median income. And, again, that for a family of four, can be upwards to $100,000 for our area. And in another area, maybe in a small town or a rural community, because their cost of living is lower, that number would also be lower for them. But for our community, it costs quite a bit to live here.
So tell me, who is most affected by the lack of affordable housing?
I really think everybody is, right? It's a ladder so that whenever middle income families are looking to, move up, maybe they need a larger home because their family's growing. They can't do so because people who are living in those non-starter homes feel constrained and want to stay in those homes because maybe their interest rate is lower, right? But when we talk about that 80% area median income and lower, that's all kinds of families. That's our police officers, that's nurses, that's school teachers. And so when you go lower than that, we're looking at the majority of our community is made up of workers that work in the hospitality industry, right? They wait on tables. They are nurses, aides, they're behavioral health techs, and almost all of those really helper kind of roles that make our communities work are in that bracket.
So across a whole spectrum there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what would you say are the top factors driving the affordability crisis, and what factors are realistically not fixable? For example, is it land scarcity, high demand in desirable areas, construction and insurance costs, or other?
Yeah, I think it's really all of the above, right? So we at the city, under Mayor Welch, really try to look at affordability as a whole picture. So while we have some audacious goals around affordable housing that we've been able to accomplish, we don't stop there, right? We're talking about making sure that we're lowering transportation costs, and we're looking at ways that we can make childcare more affordable for people. We haven't figured out the magic bullet on any of those things. And certainly it's getting harder and harder to crack the code on all of the things that make up a family's budget. But certainly in the housing realm, insurance is playing a large part of that. Our land scarcity, we're one of the most built out communities in the state and in the country as well. Pinellas County is. And so land scarcity matters. Our land costs more than other communities, but the interest rate right now really makes a difference in that. So the cost to borrow money for a developer drastically impacts the cost to produce a unit. I can tell you that whenever I was a council member, not even 5 years ago, the amount that the city needed to put in to help build an affordable unit was often about $20,000 per door. And it was costing less than $200,000 per door for a multifamily unit to come to fruition. Now that cost is about $350,000 per door.
Wow.
And the cost that the city would need to put in to make that come to fruition is anywhere between $50,000 to $100,000 per door. And we're only gap financing. And so, our partners like FAST that are doing the right thing to advocate for more affordable housing for the least of these. One of the conversations we have with them regularly is, sure, the city is willing to do more, and we have done more. We've increased our goals. We're putting more money in than we ever have before, but we're only gap financing. And so when you want the city to do more, it also means that the state and the feds have to do more, and the county has to do more, because, again, we're one piece of that puzzle. There's private equity in a deal. And so a lot of people don't really understand that it's a capital stack that makes development come to fruition. And so we're like this much of a big pie. And so, when we do more, it means that all of our partners at the table also need to have more dollars to be able to spend to make that, $350,000 per door doable.
Yeah. That's something that's different when we're trying to put all the pieces together. I think it helps for our viewers to understand, right? It's not just the city, but there are all these other pieces that come together in order to make sure that we're able to do this. Now, you mentioned the mayor. So let's talk. I know that the mayor has set certain goals for affordable housing. Can you share what those are high level, what the goals were, and how the city is doing in meeting those goals?
Yeah, so I'd say, the goals are lengthy and there's a lot of numbers attached to them, but I'm going to try to break it down into something that's a little more easily digested. So when we talk about affordability, I always think of 3 Ps, right? So we've got to produce new units, and that's multifamily units. And so for us, our goal, I think when I started 3 years ago, was around 2,500 units. We've increased that to 3,200 units in a 10-year time frame. And so, again, our goal for production of units is one thing, and then we'll talk about those other P's in a minute. So right now, for that 10-year period, we have 1,025 preserved or completed. And we have 2,671 in process, funded, permitted, or under construction. So, these deals take 5, 6 years, 7 years to come to fruition and get built because it takes so long to get the dollars together for that. So the 10 years, while it sounds like a long time, really isn't in the scheme of this type of work. So we're 1,000 units done. 2,600 in the pipeline, and that's to that 3,200 goal. And so that's production of units. The other thing you have to do that's really important is preserve units. So the affordable housing that we funded in years past, we want to make sure those units don't expire because we've already invested money in those. And so we have to be looking at, which ones are going to expire, put new money in those. So something like Jordan Park, for example, we don't ever want a deal to not be able to do what they call recapitalize, because then those units just fall into disrepair.
Correct.
And so something like Jordan Park, we put a couple million in that to make sure that those were brought up to current standards so that people could live in safe and clean, affordable housing. And so, that's also important. And then the third P that I like to talk about is protection of tenants. And in my tenure as a council member, we had a tenant bill of rights that I worked on. We were really proud of that. The state has preempted us on that. And so we've had to get really creative in that. And so we have repurposed people who used to do codes investigations to be what we call, tenant advocates, that every single morning they check the public record of who's had an eviction filed against them. And then they go out to those doors and knock on them and make contact with them to say, you've had an eviction filed against you. How can we help? We can connect you to legal aid. Here's how you do various things. And so for those in the last 5 years, and that wasn't in contemplation in the first couple of years of this 10-year plan because we had the Tenants' Bill of Rights at the time. But even so, we've touched 16,000 tenants in that timeline of trying to make sure that they aren't evicted, right? Because if they fall into homelessness, it's even more expensive for us to help, try to preserve them in their housing. And then we know, especially when there's kids involved, there's trauma that happens when you're evicted. And so this is a really important strategy for us. We also, in addition to eviction prevention, we applied for some dollars from the feds that other communities had lapsed, and we're able to provide utility relief to those families. I'm really proud of that work because, again, those are dollars that would have just been lapsed by other communities. We helped almost 5,000 people with their utilities through that program. And then we also do tenant inspections. And so if a tenant calls the city and says, my landlord's not fixing X, Y, or Z, right? I have mold in my unit. That's pretty common. I have pests like rats or things of that nature. We are able to inspect the unit and then ask the landlord to repair it. And if they don't, bring them in front of our code enforcement board. And for that, we've helped over 2,600 tenants with that. And so, there's a lot of other numbers. There's purchase assistance and, units we're trying to produce for on city-owned land, like habitat, type unit. Mm-hmm. All of those are an important part of our strategy. But, those are some big picture type things. I would say for Mayor Welch, one of the things that is most different about him than the previous mayor is his focus on wealth generation for families and really kind of pivoting to that home ownership model. And so that is really important for us. We've had hundreds and hundreds of families go through purchase assistance, that more than 300 in Mayor Welch's tenure, but we've had more than 1,200 go through the classes that are required. So we hope they're in our pipeline and that they may also purchase a home sometime in the future. And then we have more than 200 home ownership units in development at this time on city-owned land, so that people can become future homeowners and pass that wealth down to their children.
Yeah. It is a legacy to own a home, right? To be able to pass it down. So what do you think can be changed in the next 1 to 5 years to meaningfully increase affordability?
I'm going to say what I think our citizens would say. We have a lot of families, young families, and that child care piece is really, really stressing out our families, I think. And so while we haven't figured out the way to solve that, I'll tell you it's top of mind. We have a whole strategy for how we are addressing development of these units, and again, trying to provide more affordable housing for our families. But I think the child care piece is something we're spending a lot of time on right now. And I'm just going to use my own daughter as an example there. You may not know, I know Gypsy knows, I adopted a child who aged out of foster care. Shockingly, she's now like 28. She has a 3-year-old. She's married. It's hard to believe that for me, but so she recently moved from St. Pete because it was more affordable for her family to live in Ruskin or Sun City Center, right?
Yeah.
But what she didn't know when she made that move was she was paying about $250 a week for childcare at the time. Well, so now her rent's a little bit cheaper in the community she's living in, but her childcare is almost $350 a week now. And so she just traded it. She got to move into a home that fits the needs of her family, but the childcare is a little bit more. And so, I think our community is struggling with childcare, but I know so many people. I know Councilmember Fig Sanders talks about her children looking outside of the city for a place to live. But again, this entire affordability is about the whole budget, right?
Right.
The cost of a car. I know, looking at even used vehicles back in the day, $500, $600 was a large car payment. That's a small car payment now, right? Car payments are as much as what used to be the cost for a place to have a roof over your head. And so we've got to figure it out from all components. And, groceries, putting food on the table, that is getting more expensive for our families every day.
Every day it is.
Yeah.
So one final question for you, Amy, what is the most innovative thing the city is doing to meet the moment?
Wow, that's a hard question because we are doing so much. I will tell you one thing that we're doing that I wish other folks in the private sector would do, which is employee rental assistance. And so through some of our union contracts, and we think that, having good union jobs is good for our workers, right? Because there's protections in place for them. And, having a city job is a great thing because you get health care, and that's a part of the budget cost for a family. So I'm going to mention 2 things that come to mind, actually. So the first thing is that employee rental assistance. So if you live in the city and you're cost burdened, you're rent burdened, which by HUD's definition is you're paying more than 30% of your income going towards housing. We say that we're willing to give you $500 a month, up to $500 a month for 2 years to try and help with your cost burden, right? And so while you're in that program, we offer all kinds of opportunities for you to learn more about cleaning up your credit or budgeting, or how to, do these home ownership classes so that you can own a home one day. And I would love to see the private sector, our local hospitals who are struggling with housing for their workforce to replicate that model. I'd say the other thing that I'm really proud of that we've done under Mayor Welch that is around this is, we know that jobs are an opportunity for people. And so we started what we call the Mayor's Future Ready Academy. And in that program, you go to school part-time and you intern with the city, but we pay you while you intern with the city for the hours you're with us. And if at any time you show promise in that program, you don't have to complete the program. So if sanitation, they rotate through all these different city departments. Mm-hmm. And if sanitation shows interest in an employee and they are interested in that department as well, we don't say you got to complete the 15 weeks or however long it's a semester program is. They can go ahead and hire them out of the program right away. And we've seen those young people already get promotions and start to advance in the city. The other thing about that program that I'm super proud of is when we were designing it, I said to HR, listen, I know our young people, and I know that while they're in the program, they got to eat today. They can't worry about self-actualization, right? Because they got to feed their families today.
Yes.
And so our standard process is that you're not eligible for that employee rental assistance while you're on probation, which at the city is an entire year period. And so we said, if you're in the Mayor's Future Ready Academy, you are eligible for that employee rental assistance from day one. And that's a huge deal. So they're able to get that $500 a month while they are going through that program. Then they are paid while they're at the city. They are going through the program with the P-TECH at the same time. But it's a little bit of a way to kind of offset the cost of their schooling to them, that we're able to help with some of their stipend towards their housing.
That's awesome. I think that's a really great program. I want to thank you for your time today, Amy. We really appreciate it. You've given our audience and our viewers definitely some great information that I hope they will be able to take advantage of as we move forward dealing with affordable housing. So I want to thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Adrienne. I'd love to just mention, particularly for residents of the South St. Pete CRA, we have a lot of home ownership opportunities coming up in the coming years. We have Habitat developing townhomes. The city's also developing townhomes. So if you're interested in home ownership, we would love to walk you through that process and help you start your legacy. And there's a number of other programs we'd love to come back and talk about at any time. So if maybe grandma, auntie, somebody willed you a home, but they didn't have a will and you're caught up in a probate process, we have ways to help you there as well, all at no cost. And so we could talk about housing for hours, and we'd love to make sure that we get that information out in the community. So have us come back anytime.
We definitely will do that. Thank you so much for your time today, Amy. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.